Hi, everybody.
Hey,
What is up?
let's get that raccoon out of the frame. There we
Why? That's what makes it,
go.
is the
Yeah,
uh the backgrounds, no?
you know, it's funny. When I saw that thing, I had to get it, and we were sitting just like outside on the bench, and I had it on my lap, and this couple walked by, and like one of them freaked out and pushed the other one at it, as if to deal with it, like if it was like a wild raccoon, which was also an interesting insight into their relationship that they probably discussed after. But it fooled them. So
That's
vindicated purchase. Yeah, I guess before everybody joins in. Yeah, I think leading up to last Tuesday and then like the conversation since then, it's interesting what everybody wants out of this. Or, in terms of like audience and like what matters based on their experience or like their frustrations. Or I know like Lou was talking about, like, there isn't depth. Everything I'm reading around this stuff, there isn't depth,
Yep.
which is interesting because Josh just posted the Microsoft platform guide, and like product mindset was like, here are 3 paragraphs. Moving on.
Yep. And so it's an example of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think honestly, like this is why during the tag meetup at Chicago, I was so adamantly talking about how to set these kinds of projects up for success. Like, it's unfortunate that you're not getting like that this topic and that this topic being one that you raised, Michael, is like didn't have the support or the setup that we're talking about trying to put into place for other things. So, but I think we can retroactively, you're calling out yourself, retroactively going back and putting in some of those things. And so one of the things that I want to try and formalize a bit is like, just like we ask projects that are applying for the sandbox to answer some like questions, and everybody kind of has their own take on answering those questions. They aren't super formal, they aren't graded per se, but they give us some talking points on the topic. Some of those questions include like, what is the gap, like what are you trying to solve, like what else do you see in the market that's doing this right now, like, etc. And I think that there's those types of questions around all of the projects we want to do. So like, who is your target audience, what is the change in behavior that you think you would see from a successful output, like those kinds of questions, I think, is what from your message in the platform as a product group is sort of saying, hey, let's go back and revisit that. Who are we targeting? What are we trying to answer? How do we generate the information that we need to get the outcomes that we want to get? So I think it's really great that that's what's naturally occurring in this piece of work, and I'd love to see how we can make it more of a smooth entry for people as we go. We learn, we get better as we
Yeah.
go. So
Yeah, and I think just part of it is like there were so many things happening between
yes,
like the original paper and the maturity model, which kind of had steam after it, that it just didn't get visibility. So I think people just like as they looked at the topic, like reflexively applied their own definitions, right?
yep,
And the other problem was, and I was talking to David about this yesterday, is just like the fidelity of what like Oliver and I presented looked like, oh, these people wrote a paper. It's like looking at the designs of the wrong fidelity, so you have the wrong conversation. Really, it's at like the bullet point level. Like none of this would I publish and release in the form that it's in terms of like verbiage and like the way it's written. Like outside of this group, I wouldn't even feel comfortable and like because it's so rough. But I think because it looked formatted, they're like, oh, I guess this is the thing.
yep.
I mean, that was another like
Needs more broken English. Like,
yeah, I think so. I think there's way more red like
yeah, yeah.
around it. Um,
What's
well, I guess
cool is that you're realizing or identifying and opportunities to change that stuff now when we're picking up the most steam for this topic, right? Because like as you said, like we had got a lot of steam for the maturity model coming out of Amsterdam. We're getting a lot of awesome new joiners, like a lot of your faces. I've seen names around GitHub and Slack a bit, but I haven't seen you all on calls before. It's really fun to watch how KubeCon sort of invigorates the community around things, and this is the front and center project for our working group at this time. And so it deserves the attention to make sure that it has the right setup and the right opportunity for people to engage and feel kind of productive and heard and things within it. So yeah, I think it's basically it must be. I can imagine it's frustrating given that it's something that you've been thinking on and thinking about doing for a long time. But I think we're set up for a lot of success at this stage, which is cool. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, as someone who was like thinking about this for a while, but not having like the critical mass around it, it was kind of an ad hoc thing. But I mean, I'm happy with this. Like, the more people that want to try, that join the conversation, um, means we can have better conversations with more diverse perspectives and get into a much better, more like at the end of the day, a more valuable outcome. Not something that would be like easily dismissed as like cool. That's like some surface level interesting things on product, along with the million other things. I think, as Lou pointed out, let's move on now. Um,
Yeah.
so
So
I
I
think,
think. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, from my perspective, I think what good looks like at the end of this meeting is that we are able to be successful in a more asynchronous way and in a way that focuses our synchronous calls during the existing working group calls. So what I mean by that is that our synchronous calls are in sort of 20 and 30-minute chunks rather than hour chunks, but they're still like 20 to 30 minutes every couple weeks. Like, so we still have plenty of sort of time to dive in to narrow topics, just not the whole thing. So that's really where I'm at from like a organization point of view. Other than that, like, I don't know if other people have other hopes and dreams to come out of this meeting. But
yeah, I mean, and I guess without monopolizing the conversation, I'll say that, yeah, taking a step back, going back to audience, right? There's still very open questions about who the audience of this should be. And then, what does that look like? If we can work, create an outline around it, then it's a lot easier to break up into smaller groups or individuals and contribute to just pieces of the work. So the whole thing doesn't overwhelm any one person. So, I mean, I can just say what this was for me, and then maybe we can start talking through like audience, and if this is really multiple efforts or like complementary pieces of work instead of just trying to all agree on one audience for one thing. So,
does it make sense to start from where we've come from? Like, I think from what I've read from, as I see a lot of faces here that have said in Slack that they've given the papers reads, they have an idea of where things have come from. Does it make sense to go back through that, or does that set the framing in a way that you were saying like isn't where you want to like set the framing? And so instead it's like, okay, topic of, hey, we've talked about platform as a product in both the white paper and the maturity model, but like it's been quite a high level brush of like, you should do this thing. We want to do better than that. That's my highest level of framing of what this group is trying to achieve. And then it's like, okay, but what does do better mean? Like, who are we trying to do better for? What are the outcomes we're trying to provide them? And that kind of thing. And I think maybe capturing some of these thoughts. I don't know. Do you have a working doc, Michael, that you could share, or should we start one up? Or
also, I mean, we have this recording and I have like Crisp running in the background, which gives me summaries that are 70% useful. So between all these things,
nice,
let me share.
awesome, thank you.
Maybe while I do that, we can just open it up to folks like, around audience and what this thing looks like from your vantage point and what's the value here.
I think it was already open for commenters, right? So everybody should at least read it, or should be able to read it.
Sorry, so your goal, everyone should be able to read. So like basically public outcomes, public writings on this that are coherent from our kind of shared group here. Is that what you mean there by that?
Yeah. We had like Google Docs, and we opened up for review everything for commenters, not editors, as a like role, just to keep track of any feedback that we get on those papers. So there should be everything, and Michael surely sends it in a second.
Yeah, I can, yes, trying to multitask here.
Oh yeah, Victor already sent it. And every
Yeah.
other document is linked in the project plan on the top. So this entry point here, the platform as product paper guidelines, is basically the entry point to every other document that we have.
Cool. So which document do you think would be best suited for sort of capturing the thoughts from today, which is sort of like what direction does the project want to go?
Yeah, I think I just created a separate doc for that I'll share. But also, if everybody wants to give this a quick read, I think what I shared now is like a super quick read around what the intent of the immediate research was going to be around this paper, who the audience is, who we want to talk to, why we want to talk to them. And then we can use this for today.
Yeah, which is all part of the linked research guide on there.
I think, to me, a big question about the interviewees is that what classifies as a platform? Like, I can give you a specific example. As you might have seen, I work for GitLab, and I interviewed plenty of people, built all the automation around GitLab. Now, if you think about Backstage and more kind of platform-like platforms, it's hard to say that they are running a platform. On the other hand, from their end, they call themselves a platform team, platform engineers, and they are providing a platform from their own perspective. So by their own standards, they are running a platform. What they do is that they have a dedicated project with a YAML file. That's what every engineer has to edit if they want to start a new project. And then automation kicks in and sets up everything. Would that classify?
There's a limited scope platform. I was talking to a group in a coffee ops just an hour previous to this, and I was asking, we were getting into what is a platform. Someone had a nice sort of concise definition. Maybe, you know, we can see if we agree, but a platform is something you build for users to build things that you did not explicitly plan for and anticipate. And, you know, there's a certain, you know, you could whinge on that and say, well, they're building a microservice with specific business functionality on top of my platform, but they still have to go through this very uniform process of creating a specific JSON or YAML file to describe, you know, the code base I want to use. Or you can say, you know, and I think it comes down to how general or specific is the platform itself that you're building, right? And I'd say that, you know, you can say that that entirely built on top of a CI/CD framework, that's a platform, but it's not particularly general purpose, right? But it might suit that organization perfectly.
Exactly. So that they are, for the interviews, I think they would classify, even though I agree with you that it's not a general platform, because they are platform responsible people of a successful platform.
In general, that's
That's
a
why.
great question, and I think that's the current step that we wanted to do. So we have this recruitment. I'm sending the link just now. It's our recruitment plan, basically, where we wanted to find some requirements that any, you know, recruitees have to fulfill. We wanted to brainstorm the last 2 weeks around that, but I think neither Michael nor me didn't really find the time to brainstorm for that. But you know, it's a really good point there, because I didn't even think about that we should also have a clear definition of what even is a platform team that we want to address there. We directly started to, you know, what maturity does the platform team need, and how do we identify that maturity? It's a really, really good point, Victor. What is a platform for us?
I think that's why I'm a little bit concerned about starting from our existing guidelines. Like, I think this is fantastic, like prior art, and what we will probably lean back on when we get to interviewing. But I feel like even things like the built-in assumptions around the maturity of the platform owners that we want to be writing for, and the assumption of the platform owners we want to be writing to, and the what are platform owners, and like all these things are like little baby assumptions that add up into this document. And so like I think that conversation of like, who is it that we're like, let's get on the same page on who are we targeting, what are we trying to achieve, therefore who do we need to talk to, like, and what are the shapes of our interviews. So I think Lou was describing last night, that in a way that I found helpful, the idea of trying to interview for like generative ideas and like discovery versus like reinforcement of something that already exists. I'm butchering it, Lou, but that basically there are very different. I swear I wasn't just eating pizza during your talk. I was listening, but there was, there's different ways in which you are shaping an interview dependent on what you currently think you know and what you want to achieve from the interview. And I think those are the questions that are like have a lot of assumptions within here that we haven't, I think, maybe got clarity on, and that's from not having the kind of focus on this from the beginning kind of thing. So
in terms of the people that we are targeting for the paper versus the people we're going to interview, it feels like that could be different parties. And in terms of the interviews, like, are we targeting the organizations that we know are already operating in this way, even though it's an emergent field, right? Like the Netflix, Google, developer enablement, like all the places that we know are actually implementing in the way and have product management teams and things like that. And are those our target? And are we trying to then consolidate that into a paper that says, here are what some people are doing, and we think this might be a solution, but like I brought it up last time, want to avoid trying to make it seem like there's a Spotify model that if you just follow this, it's going to be nirvana.
So
No,
one
sorry,
one
go
thing
ahead.
that I'd like, yeah, one thing I'd like to say about that is I think even just seeing this now, like there is kind of a differentiation between platform as a product and then the platform itself, right? So kind of almost a layer of abstraction above, where you have the platform and the people using it, the people who are responsible for maintenance of it, and then you have the platform as a product, which would be like, a gathering of tools to make the platform, or even better yet, development of tooling that brings those tools together in an intelligent way, so that whenever you interview someone and you see like what their needs are, their business needs are for their platform, platform as a product then is that layer that is able to pull all that together and distribute it to them, is kind of the way that I see it.
I mean, in general, to your question, we leaned on the maturity model to begin with, and really wanted to look at provisional and operational maturity, like the start of a platform as the target audience for the white paper to read, or for the paper to read, and then for the interviewees, more the scaled and optimized. So, basically, what can you get out of it? As you said, some experience, and what other organizations did, and what worked and what didn't work. And what we also wanted to do is to find out what approaches some organizations did consciously and what approaches some organizations did unconsciously on the path to deliver the product. So the perspective on it is more like an organizational level, like not a really technical level. I think that's covered with other parts. In here, we really want to look at how did the organization around a platform happen within successful platforms and successful organizations with platforms. What did they do consciously? What did they do unconsciously? What can people that are in the start of their journey learn from those experiences? Right, Michael?
Yeah, I think the inherent assumption is that if we look, we reframed it within the maturity model because it's, nice to build on related things. So if we talk to, let's say, the early journey folks and interview the, scaled and optimized folks, the inherent assumption is scaled and optimized are operating with some semblance of a product mindset, right? There's like intentionality around the approach to work. There are definitions of success. Things are measured. You're interviewing users, you're designing systems, you have stakeholder buy-in, you have a culture where like that kind of work and experimentation is done. Because you can't get, like, I don't know how a team gets there, like ad hoc brute forcing to like a platform that we would define as successful and mature, which also goes back to what is a clear definition of like a successful and mature platform, going back to the first paper, that would create the criteria of the kind of folks we'd want to interview. But for me, and kind of how this shaped up was more of a focus on the organizational and leadership side, and not so much how is product done at like the team level bottom up. Because I think if you don't have the top-down support for this effort, it's very difficult to imagine how teams create the space to do a very different kind of work than they're used to doing. So
That
you
makes a
can.
lot of oh, sorry. Go on, Mike.
Oh, no,
Sorry,
no,
I
no,
didn't mean to interrupt.
no. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that aligns actually really well with what Dominic was saying and with what Josh was proposing as maybe an outcome for the meeting as well, in that like we can go in batches and we can do learnings. We can get like a small number of interviews with a tight goal around it in place, and what we learn from those will drive a new hypothesis or a new goal. Maybe it's just to widen the net of what we were just doing because we found that to be so valuable, or maybe it's to pivot into something else. So I'm hearing Dominic say that the goal is to talk to people that we would share the understanding that they're in the more scaled or optimizing level of maturity, that they would self-proclaim that, and that it would seem to fit based on the maturity model and the white paper definitions of those things. And what I'm hearing from you, Michael, is that you have an interest in focusing those conversations around how leadership can support it. The question I would have for the room is like, how do we feel about those starting to drive the focus of our first kind of set of 5 to 10 interviews, and what kind of outcomes what kind of hypotheses are we bringing into those interviews to therefore validate if this is a good direction, or we need to pivot or whatever. And then B, like, if we're trying to make it so that we're supporting leaders who need a mind shift change, who do we want to be interviewing? Is it leaders who already believe in these things, or is it teams who have evolved that change in their organization and can talk about how they evolved the thinking of their leaders? I don't know, right? Like, what are we? So this is where by figuring out what questions we want to ask, we can have a huge impact in how we set up those interviews, I think.
Yeah, I think if we're chunking it up and we have now a lot of, like, if we can align on the intent of all this and we have enough folks to, break up, I think interviewing actually both groups in an exploratory way would be interesting, right? Because from talking to people who are stuck, it would be incredibly interesting if we approach it the right way to learn, like, how do they see the world? They're not going to explicitly tell us the answer, but they'll give us the context from which we can, synthesize the answer around why they're stuck. In part, like, they're stuck because I'm going to be making a bunch of assumptions now, and at least anecdotal experience of working with like enterprises that are more on the, let's say, laggard side, and leaders that are abstracted away from product and platform and product development as a whole because software isn't their core business. Just like, how do they see the world, right? Like, what are the things they're not connecting to the outcomes that I guess are so clear for us as people who like ostensibly understand this stuff and operate in this way. And then obviously talking to the mature companies who have leadership that supports it and gets it. What did that look like, right? How did they create the space for this work? Who kind of drove platform as like a strategic thing that like needed the same kind of focus that external products got? How did those teams operate within that model on the ground? That's more than any one person can do, and certainly the scope gets wider. But I think we can have like concurrent efforts around that like feed back to each other that will help us decide how we want to continue talking about this. It's starting to seem like there's just like a lot of depth that we can mine here, and one paper doesn't seem like the way to do it. Like, trying to unify this in one, like, here's our work, where inherent in this is also like it's going to evolve, like every time we come back to this and we look at the industry, we'll need to update like what we're seeing that's changing or how things are shifting.
It sort of feels like, from what you just said, we believe. I'm sorry, I just saw, Lou, that you had your hand up. I can never decide if a group is using hands or not. that we believe that platform as a product is the right way to go, but in some ways we need to actually measure for that. Like we need to talk to people and measure for that. And if we believe that, then the thing that we need to discover, and we want to promote that, like our idea with this paper and this group of people, we want to promote that. And so our product is effectively getting platform as a product adopted. So we need to figure out what the frictions are for that. And that other group is, the group that can help us with figuring out the frictions for if we actually find out that it's the right thing to do. We believe it, but we should talk to people who have achieved it and decide that that actually proves out. Then we need to know what it takes for people to get over the frictions. And that will be the biggest challenge, probably. We all have a gut feeling that it's the right way to go and we'll have it validated. Figuring out the frictions is probably the really hard part.
I think to that point, like with goal 1 there, it makes a lot of sense to me to actually like figure out like all of the origin points, right? Like what started the process for each group of people. And then from there, we could develop, some metrics of success and or pain points, things that were friction, and kind of base the research on those, what brought those up, how they were overcome, that sort of thing.
Let's go.
Dominic had
Yeah,
their hands
Lou and
up.
Dominic. Yeah.
No worries. Sorry, I was taking a back seat, so I'm trying to catch up on the working group, but it sounds like we're very early, so that's okay. So I'm in at the right time. That sounds good. What I'm kind of hearing and what I feel like we need is kind of two things. Like first thing that's missing for me, I don't know if this exists. Please point me to it if it does. But it feels like we really need some sort of like alignment document about like what we want to get out of the working group, like in terms of like what we're doing. And I don't mean in terms of like one white paper or two white papers, but more like kind of what's motivating and just driving us to be here. Like just so we all got on the same page. I'm sure some people join this call because they're trying to learn something or apply things to their own company. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I think as long as we have a shared understanding of like why we're here, like why we're doing this and what we want to get out of it. And then I think that's something we could do maybe even async after this call. It'd be hard to get to that in this call. But then the second thing after that, and I mentioned this in the Slack channel, is I think we should also embrace the fact that we don't know what we're talking about yet. And I've done a couple of talks on platform as a product just because I was like, oh, this is a term that exists in the community. I've started talking about it and I'm like, oh, this is a term that no one has any idea of what this really is and what this means. We're very early in terms of like what platform is. Like we hear it and we make assumptions about what we think it is, but we don't really know what it is. Like no one has a good definition aside applying product to platform, which is a very broad sort of idea of what this is. And I think we should probably embrace that. We talked about today, even in this call just now, like that we believe, and I think it's a great phrasing that David said, we believe that applying product to platform is a good thing. And I think we should, one sort of goal of this group should be to prove that. Is that even true? Like, what does that even mean? We say that we think applying product to platform is good. Why do we believe that? What evidence do we have that says that that is the correct thing? And also, I think as well, the challenge is that companies exist on a spectrum. These techniques exist on a spectrum. So we need to figure that out. I would say one thing that would be helpful is I think we should just embrace that uncertainty. I think doing those exploratory interviews would be very interesting. I would love to know stories of particular teams about how they believe they are doing platform as a product, or if they are or not. The thing that I think the trap here is spending too much time on the aspirational side of it, in terms of spending too much time on what you think platform as a product is, rather than what people are actually doing today. And I think going out there and talking to companies and say, hey, how do you think you're doing platform as a product right now? That might be in terms of like, they've got roadmaps, they've got some in a source program, whatever they think this actually is for them. And I think that would be really useful. I think we should just embrace that. And then as part of these groups, we can kind of start to bring some of that research and feedback in, and then start to analyze and have a think about what we think that means. And then eventually that builds up into, does this become a white paper? Who is that white paper targeted towards? What information have we gathered that we think is of use? So really what I'm saying is I think we should just embrace that we go out there and just research, and probably avoid the temptation, I think, to start trying to define too early, because I think we'll struggle. It'll be really hard to do without that sort of body of research to lean on, I think.
Dominic?
I mean, yeah, you just basically said a lot of what I was thinking about it, because, you know, I think, David, you said it, that, you know, we want to have platform as a product. We think that's the right way. And I think that's already one of the hypotheses, or one of the assumptions in there, that we're just saying, you know, platform as a product is the right way and people should adopt that. So that's what we have to also find out in the interviews. What is it the right way? First, even, you know, we had a question in here, what is platform for us? Like, you know, and then we have to ask the question on top of that, what is platform as a product for us, and what does make it a product? And we started by thinking about, you know, as I brought it up earlier, with there is some conscious and unconscious ways of how, you know, teams were organized, and what tools were used, and what mindsets were used, and, you know, related to the product mindset and all of that. So that might be an assumption, and we have to find out which tools, which processes, which structures were used. And, you know, does this count then as a product, or does it form the platform, or does it form the platform to a product compared to not being a product? Like, what does it even mean in differentiation to it? And then additionally, what was done consciousness and what was done unconsciousness, coming up to the assumption that we had, that like yet another assumption that we wanted to test with the research that is written in the research guideline that we wrote down, like that potentially every organization has somewhat of a similar, or, you know, somewhat similar journey towards a successful platform, which is again just an assumption that we have to prove somewhere. And it boiled down to, it might not be the same processes and the same ways that they do things, but there might be same key moments. Like Michael already said, you know, get the buy-in of the leadership. That is a key moment in your platform journey that everybody has to do some way. And is there some, as an assumption, and is there some, you know, tools and best practice that happened in all of the teams that we can then, or all of the organizations that we can then interview? So there were a lot of assumptions and hypotheses that we wanted to test. I think we didn't really document it that well and did write it down that well, but there's content to it.
The part we didn't get to, yeah. Michael?
Yes, so thanks for having me. My first meeting with you guys, so happy to be here. I just want to elaborate a little bit on what you mentioned, Lou, by bringing in what people are actually doing today. I think that's very important, that we not just address the leaders, because when we talk to when I talk to different teams, a lot of them just recently started calling themselves DevOps. And when talking with them, what they're doing is DevOps at scale, which goes very often a little bit into platform engineering already, or at least into platform engineering principles. And they already built a platform as a product, but they are just starting to call themselves DevOps. So when we reach out to people and say we need feedback from platform engineering leaders, I think that those people wouldn't even respond, but they are actually relatively mature already. So we're bringing in more different viewpoints, not being so restrictive on it must be, like David mentioned, the people that are already in the nirvana. It doesn't have to be Netflix and Spotify, right? We just make sure that we have something that maybe eventually even bleeds into a maturity model, eventually, if that is the goal as well, that there's an overlap to that. And by bringing in this broad set, we actually provide something, hopefully provide something that is achievable and tangible to the readers, instead of having something where they think, well, we will never get there. Or like, I just want to make sure that what we write or what we do around platform as product is something with low entry barriers. Because just, again, reiterating, when I talk to different customers, partners, or also at the events, a lot of the people that I talk to don't even see themselves as platform engineers, right? And if you then come with this North Star metric and say that's how to do it, they probably wouldn't follow, although they're already halfway there.
Yeah, well said. Victor?
Yeah, I wanted to raise a bit. I totally agree. Likely, we are all of us here who believes that platforms should be considered product. That's why we are here. On the other hand, I don't really understand the discussion because I have a pretty strong background in economic theory, as some of you might have read it today. And there is a widely accepted hypothesis. I don't know if it was proven or not, but many people rely on it, that every solution has an evolution from custom tooling to commodities, and platform is the status before it becomes a commodity. And simply, I'm sure that many of you have seen custom built platforms that are like kind of stitched together and work for a single company. And my impression is that we are in the time when we are actually moving to product based platforms, not necessarily an internal product. It will be run internal, it will be served internally. So in the end, it's an internal product, but you might still bring it in from the outside, like you bring in backstage from the outside, actually. So, but the platform as a concept is already productized. It exists on the market. You can download it, install it, run it. And as a result, I'm a bit puzzled on what are we speaking about actually, because it seems that we are discussing something that is just there. It's really the mindset within a lot of parts of the industry that we don't know. That's why research is great. We never know, and is actually changing right now and moving towards accepting these, that platforms, I don't have to build it from scratch. I can get at least huge pieces of it out from the market, I think.
Yeah, kind of looping back to, from Lou, how the conversation went. I think we're kind of talking about this at a couple different levels simultaneously. When I think about product as a platform, or I think about the product aspect of it, I'm not thinking about tools. I'm not thinking about like what's commoditized or off the shelf or what you can build as like a defined, here's the box. I think of it from the point of view of an approach to work that gets you to the kind of outcomes you want in the business as a whole. And there's a relationship between serving your internal customers and how you empower those teams then to serve your end users that pay and fund for the whole thing. So what is an approach to work that is effective to build, right? And because I come from the kind of external product background, there was like the consumer, like all of the great things that are kind of built into the model around, UXR and definitions and understanding and create like building scenarios and making bets and getting stakeholders involved and de-risking the work and experimenting with it. What does that look like when you focus it internally? How much of that is still true? How much of it changes? What is operating with a product mindset look like when you're focused, when you're an internally focused team? Does it change in some very meaningful way? Is it the same? And so, if we talk to those companies that are lagging behind to see what the friction points are, if we're talking to companies that are running ahead and have built versions of this that might not look identical, right? Some might have maybe, let's say, bought more of their solutions and pieced them together. Some have built from the ground up. What are those common patterns to the approach of work that get them to be successful beyond like the tangible, here's what a definition of like the tooling around the platform is? If that makes sense. Or if I've just
You're
muddied
almost raising a question. Oh, sorry, Josh. I'm terrible with the hands. You're almost raising a question of, should our first interviews be for product teams that we find like effective and possibly of certain shapes? So I've always said the reason why platform engineering product is interesting is not because it's the business domain of platforms, internal platforms, but it's the fact that it's a small captive audience, like with high regulation product, right? So I wonder if there's such a thing where like actually external facing for sale products that fit sort of some of those characteristics, talking to them, successful product teams, and that would actually give more a starting point of information as well, or another avenue. But Josh, your hand was raised. I apologize.
No, I really like, I just was excited by this discussion that I was, I came in, Victor, I heard what you were getting at with that a lot of platforms are built from products. And even though I just think that's an interesting thing to bring up with this group, because it's also come up, like we talk about internal platforms. And so I think that our opinion is that though you may use products from an external company in your internal platform, but that doesn't make your internal platform a product. You still own that internal platform. So like we're talking about making your aggregation of all of those products that you get from, Azure and GitLab and whatever else, aggregating them into something coherent for your developers. So even though you're using products, that doesn't guarantee that you'll treat what you're giving to them as a product. I just am curious if that makes sense to you, Victor.
Definitely, it reminds me of many banks in Hungary in 2015 who couldn't move away from Internet Explorer because they had, I don't remember the technology that was specific to Internet Explorer, and they just built their own tooling on top of that technology. So they were stuck in there, and basically Explorer was the platform for them. They brought it in, and then they built their own stuff around it. So it does make sense. But I think it's still a product actually, because what Abby mentioned, that you have users, and it's really I think product mindset is something like, I don't know if Marty Kagan rings a bell here. Basically, the product is what's described in Inspired. So the approach to building that technology stack together might be a product, or it might be just a tool chain. And I think it's really about the approach that makes it a product. But otherwise, it might be totally in-house built from scratch, or it might come in large parts from the outside and then just glued together.
Thanks.
Yeah, it does seem like there's still a decent amount of confusion. Like it feels fuzzy, this conversation, right, around the intent and focus. I think like one of the things that came out that everybody seemed to kind of nod along with is like exploratory nature of it, right? Small pieces, kind of small focus around, talking to those companies that, I mean, even that includes like definitions to get there, but like companies that are running at that mature platform to learn how, how they do it. Companies that are kind of struggling or want to begin that journey to understand how they think about it and how they work now. And we talked a lot about like product as a platform and like asking people to do it. Just to be clear, like in all of these interviews and talking to them, right, we're looking to learn how they currently do things or how they think without obviously biasing with any of our internal stuff around how we package this up or our thinking around terms, as like raw data around their experiences. David.
Well, I put my hand up to point to the thing that Waldemar mentioned, because we're 15 minutes away from the end, and it sounds like our working patterns are the thing that we really need to solve, is we all have a lot of really interesting stuff to say, and we're compressing it into a meeting every couple of weeks.
So I missed the beginning, but did we agree that we're going to try to build up an interview framework of some sort?
We didn't get quite there.
No.
We are still not sure what we're trying to interview for. So yes,
Yeah.
we need. So I think what we agreed on was we
need a
need an
list of
interview
items.
framework, but to get to an interview framework, we have to know what we're trying to achieve from those interviews and how much of it's exploratory versus proving out
So we
things.
kind of need a list of the hypotheses that we're starting from that are going to be proved or disproved in our interviews. And we want to talk about how we're going to achieve that asynchronously so that we can, more effectively move forward. So that's kind of what we need to do in the last 15 minutes. How are we going to build up a list of hypotheses that can inform our interview framework?
Yeah, well,
synchronous.
no, sorry. I mean, yes, that, but it seems like the even the step before is like we're not even aligned on what we're looking to learn.
So that's what I was kind of saying. Maybe that. Oh, so you're not even sure what the class of hypotheses are yet?
I would say, you know, the way this conversation is gone is like vaguely. I think we, you know, we have a sense of the thing, but like even, you know, um, audience and intent is an open question.
Maybe just focus on the ways of how we're going to work, because
Yeah,
I think, you know, that's we can do it all if we have a way to contribute, and Slack might not be the, or if it's a Google Doc, you know, where are we starting from, but like how we're actually going to do it.
Can we maybe list out hypotheses, Michael? Maybe, I mean, based on your original paper, there's a lot of hypotheses in there. Should we maybe just collect them out from there and make a list of 10 and have people comment?
Well, yeah, I think that, you know, to David's point is we can pull all that stuff out and contribute to it and refine it. If we can figure out how we're gonna, like, in the next 13 minutes, how do we coordinate going forward so we have some clarity of purpose and don't just spin our wheels for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, I mean, a Google Doc, do we want to take the existing Google Doc and you know, maybe we start a fresh one, but just list out the hypotheses?
Which Google Doc? Because there are many actually.
Well, I was thinking, I mean, we could start a fresh one. Just list hypotheses. I mean, I'm looking at the platform as a product paper that Michael shared as like a foundation. So like, there are definitely assumptions and hypotheses in there. So that's what I was trying to do in one of my structures, was to try to extract some of those out.
Oh, I see. So your approach would be to basically extract the hypothesis from the current version of the paper. That sounds quite interesting to me, I think.
Yeah, as a starting point, and then obviously anybody else contribute their own hypotheses unrelated to anything mentioned in the paper if things are missing. But so that would be, I mean, I guess that lends itself to just doing this asynchronously. Who do you know, who's the audience? Who do you want to talk to? What's the intent behind it? What are the assumptions you want to investigate in that exploratory research? Is that what you're thinking as a starting point?
Yeah,
I
like
would even.
Sorry.
A couple of people have had their hands raised.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Dominic.
Yeah.
Forgetting the hands.
Yeah, because that is the point that I would get step back. Is look, take a step back. That's the right word. And just go on with, like, how do we want to contribute, not just with Slack, but also within these meetings here, because Michael and me, we were used to having 3 to maximum 4 people in here. Now it's a bit more. Some people raise their hands, some people don't. I think that's the first agreement that we should take. Where do we communicate? How do we communicate? So ways of internally working. And then I also had the feeling from the discussion here that we might not be completely aligned when it comes to what is a platform and what is a product. So if we get those 3 things done until, like, asynchronously worked out, until, or at least brainstorm until a next meeting where we can align together, then we have, like, how do we want to work with a, clear code of conduct for this little group here? What is a platform for us, and what makes a platform a product for us? Then we can already derive assumptions out of those 2 definitions that we created, or that we brainstormed, right? Oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry for joining late, but generally it feels like we want to both create content from our side and do explorative research, which kind of usually doesn't work together. So similar to what Josh said, I think a best next step would be to actually define kind of the either hypotheses or areas of investigation that we want to explore. Most of those would also, like most of the things that are already in that list that someone just shared also as a on the screen, could be formed more into like, okay, this is an area of investigation. It's like measurements is an area, right? Not do you use Dora, but are you using measurements, right? So going that, and from that we can derive the guidelines, the interview guidelines in the questionnaire. And then I would actually write that, then already go into like the explorative research, doing the interviews. Because now trying to do a lot of content in terms of like defining platforms, defining stuff, that's you can do that parallelized, but not really knowing what the result will be. It's usually nicer to just start with the research and get data, and then from there see like what is the thing that is actually surprising that we're finding. Because if it's just confirmation of what we already know, it's most probably not going to be nice. I mean, that's like, no one wants to read that.
I agree wholeheartedly. David?
Just maybe a quick framing thing based on what Pooja said is, it feels like what we're doing is more like what Gartner does. We're not writing a paper, we're writing a report, at least for the first version of it. Right, because we've all said it's an unknown field, it's too emergent, like you can't write something definitive. So maybe the research and publishing the research, and there tends, Gartner and such, they put opinions on it, they put biases into it, but they don't necessarily always list it as like a definitive view of things. So maybe if we frame it that way and look at hypotheses and all this, rather than trying too hard to define things before we're ready.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at back to kind of where we left this off with, like the handful of people that were kind of looking at this, like Dominic and Puya, it was at the stage where, we had a certain audience focusing on like the optimized and the scaled, but the idea was to run through like the kind of gambit of the journey of how things get built, and doing it in an exploratory way, just to learn how they define those things and what steps they took, and instead of projecting obviously anything around our ideas of what right looks like or what good looks like, right? It was just, what is the baseline for teams that do it well? The step in that is like, we need to define and talk to teams that look like that. Here we're talking about opening it up to who should we talk to across the board, right? Teams that are just on that journey or are stuck in a very different mode of operating, and it's clear, let's say, to us in a way that we can qualify that these are like, let's say, laggards, and they're stuck in some ways of operating. If we talk to them, how did they define these things for themselves, right? Like, how do they see the world? Where are the points of friction, in a very like open and exploratory way? It seems like that's the step we're at, right? Like, we want to go and explore and understand how things are done today across a gambit of, let's say, different personas, and then figure out what we want. Like, how does that get packaged up? Does that sound?
I agree. That's yes.
Does that make sense to everybody? I see more thinking faces than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, mainly I'm thinking, so our next step, can we work asynchronously to define what our initial assumptions are? Is that our best next step? And then, but there was also the thing about how do we define product? We could discuss that live in our meetings, but
I mean, that's almost like a side. I think Puya said that's like almost a side conversation of defining these terms. Like, we all have a sense of it, we all operate with some of it. We need to, like, map it out, because it goes back to, like, it's behind the scenes synthesis work. It doesn't really go into what we're asking people, because we want to learn how they do this for themselves. It like informs maybe the framing of questions. But it almost, it's like we're in pre-alignment, right? People have certain audiences they want to talk to, certain hypotheses that they want to explore or validate. Why don't we do that? Like everyone who has an opinion on this, map that out so that when, let's say, we can see it develop async. And then when we get into that like standard Tuesday working call, the only one we'll keep around coordination, it's a much more focused conversation. And we can see like where there are repetitive, we can see that people are talking about the same audience. We can see that people are kind of converging on the same things that they'd want to investigate. And it should become clearer what that looks like. Because the outcome of that then is creating interview scripts, right? Like the things we're going to use to talk to people. And we can't have like 5 versions of the same script, because then synthesis will be a hellscape, right? Like we won't be asking anything consistently. So what patterns are we going to learn? So that would be like the convergence part that comes after. In terms of the flow of things, does that make sense?
Yeah. I was bringing up here potentially a place where we could do this. I just tried to get us started a little, like at the top of this place where I was trying to synthesize stuff from the original paper, make this a heading, I guess, and then make this just a bunch of bulleted
So to kind
lists.
of play back what Michael said, you're proposing that we have a bunch of different target groups, and that the hypotheses might be a bit different between them, and the interview questions would be different from like a high performing to a low performing. So we can have people focus on these different sort of target audiences and the hypotheses for them. Was your hypothesis of success versus hypothesis of friction, it will be different. But in the end, we need to have a consistent, there needs to be overlap and consistency between all of the interview types.
And that's the coordination piece that weaves through this, I think. But like, given how this conversation has gone, it's clear that we're on the way of aligning. And I think to Josh's point, like the immediate thing that would help us, and a few other folks have said it, is different people have different audiences in mind. We only had, we have 2 minutes left. This hasn't been an exhaustive conversation. There may be very specific things in terms of hypotheses that different people want to investigate. If if everybody takes the time to explicitly map their thinking out around who they want to talk to and what they want to learn, it'll be a lot easier for us to like read through that, come back, or even comment asynchronously on like, okay, well, where's the overlap? Are there actually just a handful of audiences we're talking about? Questions repeat themselves. And then we can, once we align on that, we can get into the actual interview scripts and coordination between making sure that we're asking things. There's like enough consistency that the feedback we get is meaningful and useful. And what does that framing look like? To your point.
Otherwise it's a few papers, different ones.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise it's like we're breaking off and we're doing our own thing.
And also keep in mind that not always it doesn't always need to come with a hypothesis from the get-go. Especially with qualitative research, you oftentimes go with exploration and develop hypotheses afterwards, because it's really hard to actually even know what you're getting out of it, right? And then at some point from the qualitative exploration, you develop the hypotheses that then you will use a survey, like actual like bigger data to confirm or disconfirm. Because with like 15, 20, 30 interviews, you're not going to confirm or disconfirm any hypotheses. Right?
Well, it depends if you're talking about academic statistical significance, or you're talking about like the day-to-day product work of like getting 80% of what you need to learn from like 8 interviews, if you could see consistent patterns emerge.
Yeah, I have an academic background, so I'm sorry about that.
Not to knock that, obviously, but does that make sense for everybody? Like, I mean, even that, like, at what level are we going in with some very clear hypothesis, or is this straight up like we know nothing, let's go blind exploratory, which is like usually you do when you go into a new space or like a new domain and you know nothing and you just want to understand the shape of the thing and hear things in people's words. I think in this case, like we operate in the space, so I think we have some, I think I think we have hypotheses that we probably want to test, but who knows? Let's map it out and then see how what things look like. Okay, we're at time. Unless folks want to stay on if they have the luxury of more time. Nope. All right.
But is this a good play? Like, I'm trying to put together based on what we're all saying. If people want to just come party on this,
Yeah, I can
add
go
it.
over the note from the other doc into this, and we can just use this as long as we have a single place.
Okay. I
But
just-
this includes the whole white paper.
Oh
below,
yeah,
right?
on top. Okay, I see. Yeah, let's forget about the white paper for the purposes of this.
yeah.
You can just
So-
delete that from that, Josh, right? You've got you sort of summarized it. If you just delete the bottom bits, then that
Yeah.
you can still use that doc possibly.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
So the next meeting is what? Not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after.
Yeah.
Correct.
Let's chat on. We'll chat online, and if
Yeah.
if it comes and we need to get together, then we'll jump on a call or people can. Oops.
Yeah, that works.
Any last thoughts from anyone?
And thank you all for joining. This was really nice. It's really nice to see that we have a couple of more people here. So thank you all.
If someone could do like a short summary in Slack with like the links and stuff, that would be super useful as well.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Michael.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Nice
you.
to have-
Thanks all.
Bye bye.
All right.